Welcome back to the Daily Poem here on the Close Reads Podcast Network. I'm David Kern. Today's poem is by an Irish poet named Seamus Heaney. He lived from 1939 to 2013, was a recipient of the 1995 Nobel Prize in Literature. He was called by several people the greatest poet of our age. And the poem that I'm going to read today is called Blackberry Picking. It goes like this. Late August, given heavy rain and sun for a full week, the blackberries would ripen. At first, just one, a glossy purple clot among others, red, green, hard as a knot. You ate that first one, and its flesh was sweet like thickened wine. Summer's blood was in it, leaving the stains upon the tongue in lust for picking. Then red ones inked up, and that hunger sent us out with milk cans, pea tins, jam pots, where briars scratched and wet grass bleached our boots. Round hayfields, cornfields, and potato drills we trekked and picked until the cans were full, until the tinkling bottom had been covered with green ones, and on top big dark blobs burned like a plate of eyes. Our hands were peppered with thorn pricks, our palms sticky as bluebeards. We hoarded the fresh berries in the byre, but when the bath was filled, we found a fur, a rat-gray fungus glutting on our kesh. The juice was sinking too. Once off the bush, the fruit fermented. The sweet flesh would turn sour. I always felt like crying. It wasn't fair that all the lovely canfuls smelt of rot. Each year I hoped they'd keep. Knew they would not. So when I thought of this poem, to read this poem, it seemed like, late August and all, or getting to late August at any rate, it seemed like the right time to bring it up. But then I was reminded that 8 or 9 years ago on the Sourceview Institute website, a friend of mine named David Wright actually wrote a blog post about this poem. It's called Blackberry Picking, a Seamus Heaney poem with candor, virtue, and reality. And I wanted to read you a few lines from his blog post because I think that it's a nice, efficient way of kind of opening up this poem to you, and he does a really good job here. He writes, I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit because the post is too long to just read directly to you. But he writes that, quote, "The title, Blackberry Picking, is deceptively simple. It suggests a mere retelling of a childhood memory picking blackberries. And throughout the first and longer stanza, just such information is given. But in the shorter closing stanza, Heaney reflects on the experience from the perspective of adulthood. And here he reveals the poem's overarching theme, our hope to retain all which we hold dear in life against the natural, inevitable reality of loss and change." Moving ahead a little bit, he writes that blackberry picking is more than just a routine for Heaney. It involves the core passions of life, of childhood. The prepositional phrase, with milk cans, pea tins, jam pots, contains the rhythm of the berries hitting the pail. We hear the memory as well as he does. But nothing of value comes without hard work. And the mini theme of the next 6 lines comes without hard work. The mini theme of the next 6 lines, where briars scratched and wet grass bleached our boots. After all, Heaney must introduce some pain here as setup for his reflection at the end of the poem. And he says this, the transition word but in the next line, a little bit ahead, signals the necessary alarm. Can we not simply have a nice memory of picking blackberries as a child? Not here, where reality is the great leveler, a fundamental that Heaney is compelled to reveal. He closes the poem, David Wright says, by saying of the blackberries that each year he, quote, hoped they'd keep, knew they would not. The painful theme of love and loss, life and death flashed before his eyes as a youth, but more intensely as an adult. But even with this, I feel there may be something more, a glimmer of light which rises, minimally but mystically from the poem. Heaney's poetic recounting of such an experience assuages him, even provides him a respite to deal with the implacability of time and death. By expressing his deepest concerns in this rich poem, he mixes the beauty of memory with the salve of writing, giving us a context for hope. That's the end of the blog post by David Wright. So props to him for that blog post. I'll read the poem one more time for you. Late August, given heavy rain and sun for a full week, the blackberries would ripen. At first, just one, a glossy purple clot among others, red, green, hard as a knot. You ate that first one, and its flesh was sweet, like thickened wine. Summer's blood was in it, leaving stains upon the tongue and lust for picking. Then red ones inked up, and that hunger sent us out with milk cans, pea tins, jam pots, where briars scratched and wet grass bleached our boots. Round hayfields, cornfields, and potato drills we trekked and picked until the cans were full, until the tinkling bottom had been covered with green ones, and on top big dark blobs burned like a plate of eyes. Our hands were peppered with thorn pricks, our palms sticky as bluebeards. We hoarded the fresh berries in the byre, but when the bath was filled, we found a fur, a rat-gray fungus, glutting on our cache. The juice was stinking too. Once off the bush, the fruit fermented. The sweet flesh would turn sour. I always felt like crying. It wasn't fair that all the lovely canfuls smelt of rot. Each year I hoped they'd keep, knew they would not. This has been the Daily Poem. Thanks so much for listening. Be back tomorrow with another poem for you.